Here.
All right. Mm. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. COVID is bad. We all know that. But we think that this is the silver lining of COVID, right? We think exactly because the existence of current pandemic, exactly people are becoming less interdependent toward other countries. We think exactly this is why some countries are being harmed, why local economy cannot develop even further than where they are right now. We think exactly because the constraints of the current pandemic, this allows for local economy to grow. This allows for more countries to have more economic resilience than they have now. So what happened? So what is this interdependency what we have in current status quo? We think current interdependency consists of 3 things. First, there exists a long supply chains. That is to say, when you try to make, a clothes, for instance, the cotton came from other places, the color then being sent into other places to become colors, and then it was sent to other countries to be manufactured, for instance. This means that there exists different kind of manufacturing companies that have the current supply chains. Secondly, it also involves huge transportations. Why? Because exactly because you need to move, all these materials from one place to another. Usually being used, ships and airplanes are things that exist currently inside of supply chains. Thirdly, right, there exists a high specializations. That's to say, currently some countries are specialized in cheap labor, for instance. Some countries are more specialized in manufacturing, for instance, like China. And we think this is exactly what interdependency means, meaning that other countries rely on other manufacturings in other countries. So what happens? What happens when COVID hits, right? What happens was that the transportations is going to be halt, right? It means that it's hard to maintain the supply. That's to say that some countries have different regulations that sometimes they might be on lockdown, for instance, or their transportation route was blocked, for instance, due to certain regulations. This means what this forces the government to do is to invest locally, right? Locally. That is to say, currently Zara most likely not going to import from Bangladesh, for instance, but most likely going to invest in people in Spain, for instance. That therefore it forces them to have a local economy, to have a local manufacturers in comparisons to the long supply chain. We think exactly this is good because we think that this is going to create a betterment for the domestic economy in the end of the day. In the end of the day, right? With that said, I'm going to talk about 2 things in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about how is this going to empower domestic economy. Secondly, I'm going to talk about lessening carbon impact, right? So let's talk first about empowering domestic economy. What is the current problems? We think the huge problem currently exists is threefold, right? First, there exists a massive inequality. Why? Because currently it's being highly specialized. For instance, big company most likely will always be the one who wins. Why? Because exactly they get the cotton, for instance, from India, for instance. They have other manufacturing company that they can pull out to. This means that they, one, have more larger connections, for instance, and secondly, economy of scale. They have a far and bigger supply chain in the end of the day. That's why currently fast fashions is necessarily very lucrative towards these certain companies in the end of the day. The conclusion to this was to say that the local economy exactly can't compete because they don't have this huge of supply chain, for instance. That's why inequality exactly rises, right? But secondly, right, there's huge job loss in the current status quo. Note that currently even in times of COVID, there's so many local economies that's most likely going to die, ladies and gentlemen. Exactly, we need more local economy to be empowered in comparison with investing in supply chain, investing in more interdependency, for instance. Thirdly, right, we think what happens currently is economic resilience. What does it mean? It means the reason why interdependency is so unstable is exactly because the moment one manufacturer falls down, for instance, you're going to disrupt the whole supply chain in the end of the day. We don't think that this is a stable type of economy. That's why we don't think that dependency should be something that we champion, right? So how does our side of the house change that, right? One, we think what this changes, they force them to support locally, right? What does it mean? It means that when Zara, for instance, manufacture in Spain, most likely the competition is going to be fairer. Why? Because exactly there's a limited amount of supplier that you can pull out from. Exactly, you cannot have a dominations in the market. You cannot kill off all these locals and small SMEs. Exactly, you have to pull them out. You have to pull them into your company. Exactly, you have to include them in your company in the end of the day. That's how we can empower them, local economy, in the end of the day, right? But secondly, right, when you talk about empowering the local economy, we think exactly we can employ more people, right? Exactly, you need middlemen, for instance. You need more people inside the manufacturing company in the end of the day. This means that more jobs will be created then on our side of the house the moment you have this local economy, because you no longer depends on the supply chain that currently exists. You no longer depend on other countries going to supply you more goods and services, for instance. Thirdly, right, we have far better economic resilience. Why? Because we think when we talk about economic resilience, most likely we're going to have more control over the supplier. We think in current times where there are huge political and social turmoil, it's most likely that some countries have certain conflicts that exist due to COVID, for instance, exactly where they are on lockdown, for instance, exactly where there are huge protests, for instance, that disable you to have transport to that particular country or to that particular area in the end of the day. What this means is that the moment you rely on local economy, you're going to have more control over these more control over the country's economy. Therefore, in the end of the day, you have a far better, far more resilient economy. We think this is the most important thing in this debate. Why? One, we think what you have to achieve in this debate is sustainability, right? What does it mean? It means that this disasters does not only come right now, it also can come in the future. Therefore, we think that the one who should win this debate is the one who can prove to you which systems is enabling sustainability towards a certain country, which are already proven to you, right? But secondly, right, notice there's huge saturated wealth that currently exists, meaning that on our side of the house, redistributions will be far better because you don't just dismiss all the all the local SMEs that currently exist. You don't necessarily just go to foreign countries to look for better manufacturing company and so on, right? Thirdly, right, we think exactly current local economy are dying. When we talk about COVID, ladies and gentlemen, people who have like these small SMEs most likely are the people who are most vulnerable. They are the one who's dying, right? Exactly why these kind of systems is the best one, because we are the one who empower them. Exactly, this big company we don't think that when I told you currently there's a huge transport currently, we exactly create carbon, for instance. What does this mean? This means that drought, for instance, and water is most likely going to be polluted on their side of the house, and exactly that's bad. Exactly why our side of the house changes, because these kind of transportation no longer exist in the kind of supply chains on their side of the house. For all those reasons, we are very proud to produce.
Thank you, Prime Minister. To open the case of the opposition side, I call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I believe the nations need to remain be interdependent with one another so we could collectively recover from coronavirus and have a future economic growth that are more equitable and accelerated. So two things in my speech. How the decline of interdependency limits the incentive of developed country to recover the economic downturn of the less developing country. Second, I'm going to explain how in the post-COVID recovery, things are going to be much worse, talking about economic resilience, talking about domestic economy is bad, talking about how they will lose a lot of economic opportunity from foreign direct investment. So first, decline of interdependency and recovery of coronavirus. I believe that in the international relations, nations are pragmatic and do hold the belief of self-survival because they are more likely to be accountable to the voters and their own constituents. Why this context is important? Because the countries that currently do not significantly have their economy weakened and hit are the developed country, mainly in EU, US, or China, that have massive budget reserve or rely their economy in less volatile industry, such as online marketplace, technology, fintech, oil and military, because these things are the constant needs of society. They still need oil to generate some degree of local transportation technology, because when in quarantine time, people more active in exploring Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, online marketplace, because people have more demand in Amazon, Alibaba, because people want to consume and spend, but through shipping, not to going out in public. What does that mean? These countries, which are developed countries, are the one that can maintain their economy and recover from coronavirus. Because, as we told you, self-survival and belief of pragmatism makes that the only reason is that the countries like China, US, EU want to distribute personal protective equipment, ventilators, masks, IV tubes to help the developing country only when the developed countries find it beneficial, and only if the developing countries are part of their economic alliance as their potential exporter and importer, as their potential consumer bases, as their potential workers. Countries do not work under benevolency and altruism that they want to fulfill the moral obligation. So because of that, loss of interdependency, these developing countries have less ability to recover because they have less PPE, less ventilator, less mask, less IV tubes, even though we have like NGO or WHO that will help, because a lot of countries currently have a lot of problem. If you rely only on WHO and NGO, you will have more people die and sick of coronavirus. At best, they have delayed help that takes hundreds of thousands of people dying. People dying is bad, that exists in opening government. So second argument, what happened in post-COVID analysis? There are 5 things that I want to talk about. The first thing is the local economy is not a viable alternative, because let's characterize the world in opening government. It's not a perfect competition of multiple small enterprises will compete directly. The one that hold capital are most likely local patrons, local domestic capitalists, cronies, which are the individuals that can monopolize the market. These are the individuals that are close with the local politicians that can make them control and dominate and monopolize the whole market. What is the comparative in our subdahas? When we have multinational companies, these are better for 2 reasons. First, because multinational company, when they come in, they still need to work with local agents, because they need to know the local market. They need to know the buying pattern. They still need to engage with the packaging or labor agency in this nation. So there is still spillover benefit. But second, most importantly, when we have multiple national companies from EU, US, China that can come in, it means that we have more perfect competition. And it means when we have competition, we can drive down the prices. We can have more availability of products and choices to the society, more equitable labor regulation, because companies compete to give the best labor protection. On the other side of the house, when we have local controlling domestic capitalists, it means that you will have worse quality of life for the consumers, for the local actors, and also for the laborers that are going to be exploited. It also means that when in the 7-minute Fahri tried to talk about argument about drought, pollution, in their side of the house, local patron, local domestic capitalists can lobby the government to allow this thing to happen. But in our side of the house, when we have MNC that their headquarters exists in US or EU, think the country that are more liberal, these local EU and US individual can boycott them, so they don't do a lot of pollution on the developing country. So we have more check and balance in our side of the house. That's the first thing. Second thing, let's talk about the domestic supply chain that Fahri wants to champion. These are bad for 2 reasons. Because first, when you try to force the company to have domestic supply chain, when the packaging needs to be there, the laboring needs to be there, the extraction of the materials needs to be there, it's not like company will just suddenly follow, right? Because it's going to be much more expensive for them. So less likely this company will pull out and leave your country without investment, because it's just so expensive for them. But the second thing, even if the companies will remain to stay, it means that because you don't have comparative advantage. Imagine like, in South Africa, or like in Nigeria, you want to build Zara there is less like consumer because people don't have disposable income, but you try to like build technology there. Meanwhile, the only thing that only exists there is only the materials. It means that you need to build the technology, the factory, the packaging from the ground zero, which makes your product become much more expensive. It means people will not be accessible to buy this product because the cost of distributing, the cost of making and operating the company becomes more expensive. Either you make the company live or you make the product become more expensive, which are not good. The third thing, let's talk about local economic resilience. These are not true, because when you try to give countries more more independency, not interdependency. The one that control is the local politician that will not have sustainability that they want to talk about, because local politicians change every 5 years. Because you will have like right-wing government, left-wing government every 5 years. This is going to be volatile, which makes you don't have long-term economic development. But in our side of the house, when you leave it to the market, you leave it to the competition of multinational companies, they are much more sustainable. They are not involved with the political motivation. They just want to have economic growth, which makes when we have like multinational company that exists in multiple amount, it means you have check and balance between these companies, so they will not be reckless. So we have more resilience because you have more check and balance in our side of the house. Fourthly, even if you can build your own local domestic economy, you need long amount of time to build your company from ground zero. This is bad because after COVID, this is time sensitive for you to create as much job as possible, because people were unemployed. People don't have public welfare. People need to get job as possible to get money to provide food and education for their kids. If you wait to build it first, you are going to have a lot of people unemployed, marching down in the street, demonstrating against the government, which will instabilize your nation. But fifthly, when you create your own domestic local economy, it means that you have limited jobs, limited taxation, limited FDI, because you ban other FDI, other companies, and competing to your economy. For these 5 reasons, I don't know why OO cannot win this debate.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. To close the case of the opening government, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay, sorry for that. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
One thing that needs to be kicked out from opening opposition is the characterization how evil our local politicians are, because they also have that in their sides of the house. So if they argue that they're that corrupt, then they're also going to face the same problem anyway. So they just eliminate the biggest chunk of this debate of their case, that is MNCs are going to be much more evil and are just going to exploit all of us, right? So basically, I'm going to talk about 3 things in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about multinational versus local cronies, which one are better, using their words. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how do we have less exploitation. Lastly, I'm going to talk about post-COVID recovery and why self-sufficiency is actually possible. And lastly, I'm going to talk about China, and what are the possibilities that we can get when we can weaken China, and that is right now, okay? But first of all, multinational versus local cronies, right? So basically, they're saying that one, local cronies are evil. First of all, this is very nitpicky because right now the biggest polluters and the biggest exploiters in the world are fast fashions, and they are multinational companies. So yeah, the reality are weighing against you. But secondly, we also think that they have structurally much more power because they have USD, they also have much more money, and that is why they can pressure the government so much more bigger than the local companies. This is why local companies are much more likely to comply with your local regulations, because not only they don't have as much power as the multinational companies, but they're also governed by the rule and the law of the local companies. They also live in the community. That's why if they have bad reputation, they can just simply pull out of the country, and they will face all the persecution that the people have whenever they go that back, right? Secondly, they argue that, look, we are going to have so much less cheaper goods, right? But the problem with that argument is, why do we need more goods right now? We're living in an era of overconsumption, where actually there are a lot of plastics in the seas. We are basically destroying our nature because of our consumerism habit. We don't understand why we want more goods, why we want more fast fashion, why we want more Zara, right? I think that what we want right now is less goods. That is fine. More expensive good, that is fine. But the moment we can prove to you that the basic needs of the people will be covered anyway, that is the moment we win this debate, because we don't need all those goods anyway, right? So moving on to my speech, right? So first of all, First of all, how do we have less exploitation in our side of the house? So yeah, basically what they argue is, right now we are having a lot of interactions with other countries, and this is good because countries are very selfish and they won't help each other if they are not dependent with each other, right? Actually, that is good, Zudi. We are fine with actually countries not really having that much interaction with each other anymore. Why? Because right now, all the relationship that we have with powerful countries, oh my God.
Jojo.
Guys, please mute your
Okay, I'm
microphone.
pausing my timer until
Fajar
Yeah, I'm
UAD.
pausing it too.
okay.
Observer Fajar UAD, please mute yourself. Observer Fajar UAD, please mute yourself.
Hostnya aja bisa nggak nge-mutein?
Iya, ada community nggak? Oh ya, thank you.
Oh God. So can I know what time you stop your timer at, Judge?
Yeah, it's 4:41.
4:41.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Ini kebalik. Timerku mulainya dari 7 terus ke 0 gitu. You still have 4:41.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay. That is actually good because all the relationships are asymmetric anyway, right? So we think that it's fine because right now we are seeing a lot of developed countries are actually oppressing all these smaller countries. What are the evidence of this? The evidence of this is our country right now that is omnibus law. This is what we see in Myanmar as well because right now the developing country strategy to appease all of these developed countries is actually to have as cheap labor as possible and as cheap land as possible. This is how they want to gain their money because of the interdependency. So what will change in our set of the house? Right now, what the country is surviving on is they're going to have less, they don't want to invest on education and they don't want to invest on social benefits because the moment you invest on education, that means people can protest and actually want more social benefits. That means class competitive advantage for you over Myanmar and other countries that is fighting on cheaper labor and cheaper land, right? So what will change in our set of the house? Comparatively, now that you have to be self-sustaining, that means you have to fulfill all of your needs on yourself, right? That means including technology, that means including fintech, for example. That means all of the cooperation that you have from the start will now have to be fulfilled by your own citizen. That is why government will be incentivized to actually invest more on education, invest more on SMEs, invest more on infrastructure to actually increase the quality of life of the people so they can become more productive and fill in the gaps of the multinational companies that that is going to leave the moment we don't have this much interdependency anymore. That also means people can have more leverage over the government. This is why our protests will work so much better, and basically our domestic politics will be so much better on top of the benefit of having a local sustainable economy. And this is how we're going to have less exploitation. We are fine with trading off all of the help coming from the developed countries, right? But secondly, we also think that the helps will not disappear at all, right? Why? Because this pandemic is actually a global problem. Even if the US have 0 cases, as long as you have cases in Indonesia, and note that countries will still have interaction because of tourism, not only because of economy, that means you still open up the possibility of getting COVID again in Indonesia. This is why countries that like developed countries will still want to send vaccine and medical help to all of these countries, because if they don't solve the COVID problem globally, they will still have it and they will be threatened by it. So this is why the argument coming from opening opposition is not that important at all, right? Secondly, post-COVID recovery, right? And why is it possible for us to have self-sufficiency, right? Basically, okay, you need more jobs. That's true. But what kind of jobs? We say the jobs that you work from 9 to 5 without any social benefits, and basically you're exploited where you have to work overtime again and again, crying, and your bone is breaking, and mothers are losing their child because of the exploitation of factories. Is not a job at all, ladies and gentlemen. We are fine with actually trading off all of those jobs. We are fine with people rioting against the government to ask for more jobs rather than having our people exploited. Even if right now we don't have people having jobs, that is fine, because at the very least we're going to have all the social protesters, and we're going to have progressives, and we're going to have a so much better future. We are fine with it, with trading off the status quo, if that is what the opening opposition wants us to have, right? Secondly, why self-sufficiency is possible? Yes, we are living in an era of technology, we are living in an era of science, right? Basically, all countries in the world can produce whatever they want. If a poor country like Cuba can actually produce ventilators at a cheaper price than the US, that means Indonesia can produce all of the basic needs like clothes, like food. We are an agricultural country, for example. We argue that it is very possible for you to be self-sustaining. What we don't have, of course, cheaper goods like Zara, like maybe Michael Kors, but we are fine with trading off all of that, right? So this is why we think that it is very possible for you to be self-sufficient. True, people might not enjoy as much goods as before, but we think that is fine, right? And lastly, right, about China, I think that this is the momentum where we can actually weaken China. I don't have to argue why is it that China is bad. I mean, all of the bad democratic backsliding, all of the soft power problem that they have. I think that this is I think that, no, it's already 6, Zudi. I think that it is very possible for us to actually weaken China right now, because now a lot of businesses are actually wanting to pull out from China and move all the factories and all the logistics back to their own homes. And China's biggest power right now is actually its leverage over economy, exactly because right now they can control economy because a lot of countries have their factories in China and all of their production are in China. This is why China is so powerful right now. True, China might not lose all their power tomorrow, but we are seeing a good trend where we can actually weaken China, the biggest elephant of problem in the world right now. And this is why we want to celebrate this. All of the trajectory are good. We are so proud to propose.
This debate to close the debate, I call upon the deputy leader of opposition.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Wait, I'm setting up. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Number one, I think OG is being very on our case because the Prime Minister said that we want to empower local economy, we want to create more jobs, we want to help the small, vulnerable individual. But then Adrina comes in and say that no, we don't need that much of product. We need to like cut off the over-consumerism. But the prerequisite of having more job vacancies, to have more manufacturers, and to create this local job vacancies to these people are having more products, are having more markets and whatsoever. So I don't think why then not having products on their side of the house will make their own benefit materialize. I think that speech is killing on their own, right? But second of all, I think that they say that, okay, we want to trade off jobs and whatsoever because we have self-sufficiency because we're living in a world of technology. Sure, USA might do that, UK might do that, France might do that, but countries like Nigeria, countries like small Southeast Asian country cannot do that because they don't have the capacity and technological capacity to have that much of efficiency of products to share and redistribute that many goods to have accessible products for basic necessities of people to be fulfilled, right? This is exactly where the problem lies on opening government because they assume that developing countries are that magnificent to assume that the local economy could solve anything, while in reality, it's not. Sadly, the reality doesn't weigh on you, right? Because they need injection of money to create more infrastructure. They need injection of money to create better education and whatsoever for them to increase their human capital and whatsoever, right? This is exactly why I don't necessarily understand. Without me rebutting it, their own case cannot fly and materialize because it is questionable. How then you would be able to do that on their side of the house if they really want to go bold like that, right? So don't think this is my speech. Firstly, I'm going to engage to the empowerment of local economy. Second, I'm going to trade off. Even if that we are controlled by MNC, well, then that's something that is fine. First, let's talk about empowering local economy. They say 3 things. Firstly, they say that there will be a shift of investment to local manufacturers, so it will help SMEs whatsoever. Second, they say that the global supply chain is bad because it's hurting SMEs. Lastly, they say that economic resilience exists on their side of the house. First, let's engage to the idea of shifting of investment. Dude, Zudi explained that this investment wouldn't come to the local SMEs whatsoever, but rather to local patrons and whatsoever, right? This doesn't necessarily, this have no response from opening government because they have lazy framings that local patrons exist on their side of the house. Yeah, but they don't have that much of a power, right? Because the power lies on market-based, like free market-based on our side of the house using MNC and whatsoever, so we don't have that kind of problem. But why then this is likely to happen? Why did the investment will go to local patrons? 2 reasons. Firstly, because the taxation of
declining of interdependency happen in COVID-19. It means that one, the only person that have the capital to create a massive production to replace the absence of product because of COVID-19 are only these local patrons. These small companies doesn't have this particular capital because they have to pay severance payment. They have to pay their employees that have to work from home, for instance. So this is exactly why the safest investment from the government to be conducted during these times are to these local patrons. So I don't think the shift in investments is in your favor. But second of all, these local patrons have the government lobbying power and whatsoever, because his uncle is there, his uncle is a lawyer, and those kind of familial dynasty that happens in most of developing countries exist. This is exactly why likely that the investment, the projects and whatsoever goes to this particular individual. But even if, let's just say that these SMEs exist and those kind of things, right? But understand these SMEs will not be able to create this massive rejuvenation of economy, which is not something that we want during these times. Because we say in terms of COVID-19, for instance, to rejuvenate your economy, you need massive industrialization. You need massive products to re-employ people and whatsoever to create the kind of benefit to help the vulnerable people on the ground. But at best, their benefit is marginal because they could only pander to a certain area and whatnot. And most probably not all areas that are rural, for instance, because not all people have the capacity to have this SME at the time like this because they cannot afford to have disposable income whatsoever. So even if it exists on their side of the house and local pattern doesn't happen at all, we said that it's bad because the benefit is marginal. But comparatively, MNCs whatsoever have the incentive to expand and to do this particular investment to other people and helping more people on our side of the house. But secondly, let's talk about global supply chain, right? They say this is bad because it's killing local economy and local supply chain. Dude, the idea of having global supply chains is actually helping developing countries, because understand that with this, they have the comparative advantage of raw materials. This is exactly why they're included within the global supply chain. They got injection of money to create infrastructure, schools, education, whatsoever. This is exactly why the infrastructure building in Africa is expanding, because they have raw materials that these developed countries need in order for them to have this exchange of money whatsoever. So the help to, if you really wanted to fulfill the basic needs of these people on the ground, exactly the way that global supply chain helps the people exists. But second of all, understand on their side of the house, local supply chain second of all, local supply chain kills the developing countries market because one, their products are expensive, right? So they cannot compete globally. They cannot export whatsoever on their side house. What does it mean then? It means that the one who control the global economy are only developing country and developed country. Developed country could penetrate to your market, killing domestic economy without having check and balances because you're the only one who have the technological capacity to do so. And people need this product that are more lucrative than the product and more accessible than the product created by local economy. This is bad because you don't have this like tight and agreement between you guys for you to be able to control this MNC later on their side of the house. So I think that having local supply chains would not help you at all. But lastly, talking about economic resiliency, they say that this is better because you have control over local manufacturing whatsoever. Yeah, but during COVID, people don't buy anyway, so you will die. But why then comparatively on our side of the house, MNCs will not pull out like what Adriana said? It's because number one, it's hard to start from the ground, right? So basically, they're less likely to pull out because they have this investment exists within this particular country. So most probably what they will do is to still trade and whatsoever, but with less minimum amount whatsoever. This is better for resilience. Why? Because at the very least, economic flow, cash flow, whatsoever economic term you want to call it, still exists on our side of the house comparatively to local economy. If people don't buy, then fuck it, right? Because they don't have the capacity to continuously do this because they don't have massive capital like MNC did. This is exactly why, if you want to talk about economic resilience and sustainability, that becomes a parameter like Fari said, it wins. But lastly, what is the comparative on our side house? MNC, right? So it's untrue that MNC will be exploitative because most probably the way that they try to penetrate to local markets is to like relation. Because they need to know the product knowledge. They need to know market estimation and whatsoever. So they need to have ties with local industry within a particular area. So it is less likely to be exploitative because they also need these people. But even if trading off that MNC's rules and whatsoever, it is fine. One, because there is a competition, right? Because the MNCs would not be only one. The reason why this is likely, one, it's because that the first mover advantage, because they want to set the product knowledge, they want to control the market. Second, expansionism, because it's a saturated market within the developed country whatsoever. Comparatively, on their side house, local patrons and whatsoever, especially like local patrons whatsoever, doesn't have this particular competition because they have subsidiary companies within that particular developing countries. In the case of Haritano, MNC whatsoever, they appoint literally their family to each and every subsidiary company and call it competition. This is bad because there's no control whatsoever, leads to accessibility of products, because this is a prerequisite of basic fulfillment that Adriana wanted to have on our side house. Owens, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. To open the closing part of this debate, I call upon the Member of Government.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I don't think you have to credit opening debate under this motion, right? Because one thing that they misunderstood about the motion is that this decline of interdependency is induced by the COVID pandemic in and of itself, right? Opening debate talks as if we as the developing country will actively reject all ties with other countries, which we believe that is not the case at all, right? We're not talking about active rejection. We're only going to tell you about the benefits that comes because of the COVID window that gave us the opportunity to lessen our economic dependency on these big countries at the end of the day. So this debate should talk about that, right? So OG's benefits, talking about how we're going to reject MNCs, is not going to fly. And OO's argument, talking about how, oh, we shouldn't antagonize powerful countries, also does not fly. Okay, before I'm going to explain two things in my speech. I'm going to recontextualize like OO's benefit, OG's benefit when they talk about re-strengthening economy, but I'm going to tie it to the actual debate. Number two, I'm going to talk about how this is exactly the momentum that developing countries need to loosen the grip of neocolonialism at the end of the day, right? Okay, but before that, two rebuttals towards, opening opposition. Number one, they say, oh, we cannot antagonize these powerful countries because we need their help to aid us in COVID. Number one, the decline is not on purpose, meaning we're not cutting ties with them, right? Meaning that we don't actively try to shove them away from our country and we're not going to antagonize them. So these ties still exist. And since the political and alliances still exist, it's still likely for them to actually want to aid us in this problem at the end of the day, right? Besides, if they purposely withheld their resources in terms of pandemic, other bodies such as the UN, the WHO will criticize them for that. So this is not harm. But number two, solving Corona in itself is a bipartisan thing, right? Regardless of your country and your political leaning or your economic ties. If Corona still exists in one country, that means it's going to spread to other countries, right? This is why the vaccine is being worked by everyone in the country and all of the world, okay? Okay, but second of all, they talked about how it's important for you to have economic ties from MNCs and FDIs and whatsoever. I'm going to talk about that in my first argument, which is the urgency of why it is necessary under this COVID pandemic as a catalyst for you to actually better your economics at the end of the day. OG only explained to you that, oh, we're going to have better economic standing because of investment. Panel, this one word is not enough for you to explain the likelihood analysis of why this strengthening is going to happen under government side of the house, right? So let's characterize what the pandemic looks like and what OO ignores in this debate, right? Number one, there is forcefully less international trade. There's forcefully less international travel. It's very limited because of the pandemic in itself, meaning that FDIs are not actively seeking new ground to invest in, and FDIs are actually pulling out and returning to your home country at the end of the day. This is exactly why OO's entire benefit, talking about how we're going to need the help of these people, are not going to exist because it's not reliable at the end of the day. And the comparative that opposition needs to take is that in this kind of pandemic where international travel is dangerous and international trade is also like limited, how then are you going to still forcefully have these international ties at the end of the day? So now, under government, why is this good? Because under this urgency, this is exactly the momentum that you need to forcefully re-examine your own assets, right? Like, what do you have? What can you take advantage of that usually other countries do for you? Like, for example, in Indonesia, you have coffee beans, but you export it to the US and import it back in the form of Starbucks, right? This is very, very harmful. But on our side of the house, because you cannot export as much as you used to, but you still have them in your inventory, most likely you're going to find other avenues to turn this into profit, right? Most likely you're going to, number one, sell it to your own local SMEs, meaning that you're also also going to empower the SMEs, meaning there's going to be more job on the ground, right? This is the analysis of more jobs that OG didn't bring to you. Now, why is this likely? Because your economics still has to run at the end of the day, but the usual avenues of letting someone else do it aren't available, right? Meaning that since you have no choice, you have to reshuffle and you have to innovate of new things. Maybe opposition might say, oh, the problem is human resources. We don't have the technology to actually process these things. Then the solution becomes you can innovate to actually solve this problem at the end of the day, because now you see the loopholes of what is needed for you to become independent at the end of the day. So even if the coffee example is not enough, or I can't give you the actual method of how to strengthen it, at least the urgency and the likelihood of the government doing this is exactly there because of the COVID pandemic at the end of the day. No, I'm not going to take OO. So compared to opening government, we've explained to you the more certainty of why strengthening economy will exist on our side of the house. Second argument, talking about how we're going to loosen the grip of neocolonialization under the side of closing government. Like, I know neocolonialization is like a fancy word, but basically what this argument explains is that we're going to lessen the grip of developed countries towards developing countries at the end of the day, right? Now, okay, you have to admit that economics is the modern goal in terms of bargaining chips in international diplomacies, right? This is the bargaining chip that countries like China, like US give in exchange for, hey, give me more influence in your country and your policies, or I'm going to pull out my investment and whatnot, right? Now, under normal circumstances, it is going to be very difficult to loosen the grip of these countries towards the developing country in the first place, because they don't want to lose their influence and their avenues of influencing other countries, right? That's why powerful countries like China and US are not likely to purposely concede to this, and it's very, very hard for the developing countries to do it themselves, exactly because they don't have the equal starting point or the leverage to actually remove this kind of influence at the end of the day, right? Now, this is why we have nature to aid us in this, right? Nature in the form of, well, COVID-19. COVID-19 is bad, sure, but this time they remove these developed countries from your country in the first place. They do it for you. And after argument one, when I already explained why this is going to strengthen your economic standing, it's less likely for them to re-enter your country at post-COVID and reinstate their influence in your country, right? So not only does the COVID pandemic force you to do something about your own economic status, but it also gives you an opportunity to get rid of a leech that's been bothering you just because they're more powerful than you at the end of the day, right? So things like China influencing other countries because they have stronger economic standing will not exist anymore. USA exploiting countries like Indonesia by importing something and exporting that same thing back to us will not happen on our side of the house. But these things will only happen under the COVID pandemic context, right? And that is, we believe that this is exactly the spirit of the motion, and we're the only bench that's spoken so far under this context. So we are very, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Member of Government. To open the side of the closing opposition, I call upon the Member of Opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we are not opposed to the decline of economic interdependency between nations, but we think the benefits of a decline cannot happen with a poor timing in the face of coronavirus. And it will result in poor decision-making of countries because they are pushed with coronavirus and they're not given alternatives. This stance effectively kicks out opening government because we agree with their benefit of declining interdependency, but their arguments are not contextualized to when the decline happens out of force, not out of concrete plans. Flourishing local businesses, for example, is one of their main cases, right? It's going to flourish if the decline is planned and is included in a government program. Like back when Jokowi wanted Indonesia to be more protectionist in 2016, where he stopped exports for mineral ores and lead and wants local companies to build their own smelters to be self-sustaining, then sure, this benefit benefit might exist. But the declining interdependency that this motion wants to talk about is one created in the face of coronavirus and is unplanned. They're not ready and most likely will not create a flourishing local businesses with no time to make that regulation, right? We think that small countries are cut off from their dependency on the US when they're not ready to be self-sustaining in this context. And we think that this missing context is fatal to the feasibility of opening government's case, and that's why we're above opening government. Why we are above opening opposition, right? It's because they've explained why it's likely that countries forced into declining interdependency will be crippled, and we agree. But what these countries will do in response to being crippled, it's not something that they've explained. Closing opposition is going to argue that they're going to make horrendous decisions in response to this decline, and we're going to explain the harm that opening opposition never really touched. So I'm going to immediately move on to my extension. All of the rebuttals will be tightly integrated with my argument, right? Okay, so the declining interdependency is going to come out of a sudden, right? For example, what's happening in the status quo is South American countries and EU countries happened. They meet the declining interdependency when US decided they would be more protectionist. They cut down on the aid that they send, they cut down on the products they allow in. There's no time for South American countries and EU countries to plan on what to do with their economy, right? When the country's economy is crippled, they don't just stay silent and be poor and do nothing about it. These countries are desperate in making sure their economy can recover or at least doesn't go into recession. So what are they going to do in this desperation, and why is it likely that it will be a bad decision, right? First of all, most likely they will try to look for any party or anybody that is willing to help them get over being unilaterally cut off from an interdependency. They're going to beg to any country capable of sending the PPE and vaccines and other humanitarian aid and continue sending aid to their country at all, right? Right now, in the status quo, that willing party is China. So what's happening, right? And these are facts. South American countries who collectively seek cooperation with China, right? For example, Huawei, who is working with Ecuador and Honduras to implement coronavirus diagnosis methods using technology and AI. Antel, that is a leading telecom provider in Uruguay, who's expecting cooperation through BRI to develop the nation's digital infrastructure. From China, right? They are exposing themselves to security breach by not thinking twice in trying to make cooperation with Chinese technology. But other than that, for example, Venezuela, who received 17 loans totaling to $62 billion, and Ecuador, who received 15 loans totaling to $18 billion, are struggling to meet the repayments, but they're going to China to expand more loans anyway. That is exposing them to more debt traps that they so badly hate in the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. We're also talking about EU countries who strayed away from US and becomes closer with China because they're the ones willing to send aid, exposing them to the dangers of Russia, who's trying to annex a lot of EU countries and are trying to look for problems with EU countries, and they're seeking safe haven previously with US because the US hates the Russians, right? So we think that they're going to make a bad decision by trying to desperately look for any party that creates bad advantages for them. But secondly, what they're going to do because they're desperate is that if they don't seek partnering countries that can get them out of declining interdependency, they're going to create new regulations in the country to desperately increase investments. The clear example is Indonesia with Omnibus Law, right? Omnibus Law has been a plan for several years now, but it's only executed now in such a rush manner with most of the parliament members not even knowing the details of the article. It's because they are scared. Omnibus Law entails easing foreign direct investment and local investments to the point that they sacrifice the rights of indigenous rights to land so that MNCs would be able to own more land. They're going to ease environmental protection so that corporations can reap more profit, thus making foreign corporations want to invest in Indonesia. And they're cutting down labor pay. This is textbook problem that they're trying to avoid stagnancy of investment coming into Indonesia, and that's why they're trying so hard to create regulations that are going to ease up investments, right? These are all very likely because the pandemic makes everyone panics, right? The pandemic, this allows these countries to take some time and make better planning, negotiate with other countries maybe, or create long-term laws inside the country to prepare for self-sustaining companies because it's very time sensitive. With the pandemic, recession comes much faster, and they need a lot of money to research for vaccines, to make PPE accessible, to do tests, for example. And that's why it's going to create a lot of desperate measures, and it's going to make them create very bad decisions, exactly because the declining of interdependency comes at a poor timing, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the motion demands. So what is going to happen in our side, right? This is something that we're going to mechanize, as opening opposition also has never explained to you what is the solution in their side of the house. when we plan for the declining interdependency, they can plan it better. We're talking about the 2016 protectionist Indonesia or 2016 protectionist US that announced that they are going protectionist, and smaller countries, even though they are shifting towards China, they're still critical of the BRI proposal that China offers them. They're not desperate because they have time to think that Indonesia, even though they're going to stop all the exports on mineral, and even though mineral and ore is one of their biggest export at that time, they were able to survive because they know that Jokowi is going to implement the smelter role, and they're trying to shift around their economic structure in the company so that they can fit in the smelter and they can be more self-sustaining, right? That's why we think that in this in our side of the house, we do like the declining interdependency of nation will be much better executed when you're planned and you're not rushed with time sensitivity because of the pandemic, right? This directly engages with closing government as well, because yes, when you have a clear head and time to plan, you can see that Indonesia is exporting ore and they're re-importing that ore in the form of manufactured lead, and that's what makes manufacturing in Indonesia so expensive. That's what makes a lot of products like cars and machines very expensive. We understand that it's going to create the benefit that closing government wants, but that can only happen if there is no time sensitivity pushing for them, and they can only happen if they have time to plan everything, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the only team in this debate that can explain to you why the declining of interdependency, specifically in the face of coronavirus, is bad is only closing opposition. We think that is a no-brainer who wins in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, member of opposition. To close the case of the government bench, I call upon government whip.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Just a few seconds to set up my timer. Oh yeah. For POI, just put it on the chat and do not unmute yourself. Starting my speech in. Wait. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are 3 clarifications that I would like to make. Number 1, I think opening government cannot win this debate because they never able to answer the basic BOP about how then you're going to have more money in order to invest to small enterprises. I think OG never answered to that. How then you're going to get money anyway? But then in opening opposition, you also are going to have less money because in multinational company is not reliable in the COVID arena, because now we're going to have a lot of global market volatility, and we have a lot of like global economy downgrade. That means so OO only assume that if you open your investment, therefore you're going to have a lot of money. No, the current trend is that those FDI are more likely to pull out in those kind of COVID pandemic because they don't have any like relatability to actually invest to those kind of poor countries who the poor countries actually have a lot of cases and they have a lot of like economic volatility as well. Therefore, in order for you to rely to the current government is the best way for you to go away coming from this kind of market volatility. But then we told you that in the closing government, we're going to focus more on the long-term impact about how you're going to have a lot of interdependency, which is a lot of harmful in the future. But before that, several responses to the closing opposition cases. Number 1, they're talking about the cooperation between 2 nations, for example. Look, that this cooperation is not symmetrical. That means due to the nature of developing and so developed countries. Therefore, I think developed countries have more likely to hire bargaining position for you to actually dictate those kind of countries. That's why this is my member extension talking about neocolonialism is actually makes sense in this kind of particular scenario. But then they're also talking about the desperation and stuff. I think bad decision only exists if you are going to be overly influenced by China, for example. This only exists if you guys are like overly interdependent towards one certain countries. But under also the house, if you are relying to the government, which is full of check, that means there is opposition party, there is some people on the ground who directly check those kind of government. So I think those kind of government is much more accountable rather than those MNC anyway. Therefore, in closing opposition, they have no better comparative. But lastly, they're talking about the time sensitivity. Therefore, we need to actually absorb more profit on that. Look, FDI will start pour out in the COVID situation. That means you're not going to have a lot of profit anyway. But in their side, if you're not stopping that right now, the influence that we get from those foreign direct investment are going to be bigger. Those MNC are going to have stronger reliance in the future. Therefore, it's going to be really hard for you to actually disengage to those kind of company. Therefore, this is the best time for us to actually shut down those kind of to actually like minimize those ties under closing government. But then lastly, they're talking about the COVID pandemic that we developing countries never able to survive if you're not going to accept this FDI and so on and so forth. Look, this is uncertain because all countries, even in developed countries, they also still suffer with the COVID pandemic. Let's just look at the US, just look at in Western like UK and so on and so forth. That means it's really harmful for you to rely on one countries who even also suffer to the COVID pandemic itself. But at least we're going to focus more on the local people and so local governance. Therefore, this kind of focus is actually better. Two things in my speech. Number one, let's talk about how then you're going to have a lot of profit by expanding those resources. But second of all, let's talk about the neo-colonialism, how are you going to prevent that better. Number one, let's talk about how that you're going to utilize resources and gather more profit if you don't rely on certain countries. Because number one, because people are really pragmatic. Therefore, these countries don't have any incentive to help people. But then why did they are going to be suddenly to be altruistic? What they did is that they want to have to give a lot of loan and they want to have a lot of debt track in the future. That is the cost that exists in Zimbabwe, that exists in OO houses. But at best, they willing to help. It is not maximal because most likely they export material from Indonesia, for example, sell it cheaply in the raw material in the West, and then West are going to export that back, and we're going to Indonesia people are going to use that highly expensive those raw material that already done by those Western countries. Therefore, on the comparative, if you use your own resources, you're going to utilize to your own people. That means you don't need to buy it expensively with the imported goods, for example. Even if we don't have any good technology in mining copper, for example, we think it is fine because as long as the time goes by, it sends the urgency for government to solving this issue. How? For example, by creating new innovation and new technology. Therefore, in the worst case scenario, it's not going to be still better because now in the future we're going to have a lot of benefits. But second of all, let's talk about the market volatility and the global pandemic, because global market is not also sustainable. During crisis, trade war exists, global economic crisis exists. If you only rely to one country, for example, in USA market down during COVID mismanagement, for example, then all developing countries who rely on the USA are also going to be impacted. For example, you're going to increasing the prices, and so your currency are being down. If you're too deep in the interdependence because of economy is interconnected one another, that is the harms that exist in the whole opposition benches, which is really harmful. Because in the output is that number one, your investor pull out. That means you're not going to have any safety net anymore. And the contrast, if we going to learn how then you're going to gather money even more by local market, for example, because the local market is not that volatile, because our people are still going to have a lot of comparative advantage in the point of resources. But second of all, we also the market are going to be dominated by your MNC and so investor. For example, there's two scenario here. If you going to use predatory pricing because now you already have enough resources to do automation to cut the production prices. Therefore, you have a lot of predatory pricing. But second of all, in the terms of your COVID pandemic, you also do not need industrialization, because the most important here is that your people have a lot of have money in their pocket, for example. Even if predatory pricing not exist, but rich people can increase their price as well. Therefore, because you are too dependent on that. So therefore, and the comparative, you have either the price is too low or too high. But second issue there, let's talk about the neo-colonialism. So the neo-colonialism exists. There are three harms on this. Number one, in the policy making, I think MNC will have more bargaining position. For example, I got too much benefit from MNC. Therefore, by taking control of this policy making, look, Shell company already give me investment 90% in India, for example. If you not follow my rule, I will pull out my investment. Therefore, they start to dictate your country even more. And second of all, if you're facing a lot of failure in managing those investments in the security level, for example, in the Zimbabwe, when China taking control of port and military, that means you're going to have a lot of bargaining position for China to actually dictate not only in policy making but also in security making. For example, by leasing their port and also by taking control of their military. Therefore, this harm is actually long-term benefit. It is long-term harm because you're not going to solve it that in the very soon scenario. But third thirdly, in the kind of economy, I think we also start to monopolize the economy policy that easier to open the for example, like what happened in Omnibus Law in Indonesia that exists in the CO houses. But second of all, you also maybe the easier to pass the easier regulation for MNC to actually open new mining which is unsustainable. So I think those kind of harms is actually have more harmful rather than their short-term benefit of a lot of capital, because we also can cater a lot of capital in the status quo.
Upon the opposition with.
Balance of people buying your products because your local market is very flourishing in the status quo, or good geographical conditions, or because you're an industrial country or you're a tourism country that really needs people to come into your places and give you income as a country, right? So the parameter should not only talk about whether interdependency or independency is good or bad, but it should talk about the context in the coronavirus exists, whether interdependency, declining interdependency that are forced is good or not. We're the only teams that talk about this, right? Because we told you on how that in the status quo, the prerequisite in order for you to be successful when you want to become independent is to opting in willingly. Why? Because three things. Most likely, you are already ready, you are rational, and you have savings as a country in order to ensure that the transitions that are happening is going to be good. It's easier for you to give subsidy for the people when they're losing jobs, for example. That's why a slow transitions is important in order to make sure that people are not going to riot. There's not only going to exist stability and stuff like that. This needs to be very well planned, like Indonesia 2016 planning that Leon told you and never been rebutted by the opposition side of the house, right? This cannot happen with the context of coronavirus because people are not ready. We don't predict that coronavirus will happen, right? We don't know. Most of us, especially the developing countries, are struggling in making sure that healthcare system are able to counter or at least to cater to the people interest that experiencing coronavirus or do testing, ladies and gentlemen. The most easier things to do in a pandemic, the most basic things, we are unable to do that. It means that on the macro level, in terms of economic, we are unable to give boost to economic activities and unable to do that, right? Bad timing because an important characterizations because it makes you unable to be rational. When you're going to pause the moment COVID or post-COVID exists, for example, the way you're going to ensure that there's SDR or you're going to ensure there's economic boost on your countries is you're going to just in fact, you're going to cut off trade partner, for example. So you cannot pick who are good trade partners that you want to still maintain because people are forced to, regardless whether they're good trade partners or not, whether they are exploitative or not, they're enforced to not make trade, economic trade at all, ladies and gentlemen. So that are the parameters that needs to be defended upon by government side of the house. They cannot just run away by saying, oh, we're going to nitpick who a good trade partner to begin with, right? Why? Because under their side of the house, most likely there's not going to be any economic activities at all. That's going to happen when you do not have money, right? So we think that bad timing is really horrible, right? But second of all, we also told you on how the process of recovery becomes really bad. This is the exclusive things that we bring in this debate because opening oppositions only told you on how that they're going to be crippled. But why are they going to be crippled in the process of recovery? They never explained to you that. We said that most likely it's going to be really bad process recovery, right? Because what's going to happen is you're going to be willing to be ally or you're going to become a trade partner with literally anyone, as long as they're able to give you money, as long as they're able to give you foreign direct investor, for example. Notice that when coronavirus, when all the decapitated and crippled economies is not only to developing countries, but also to developed countries, you're going to rush into make decisions when there are country like China, for example, there are expansionists in when coronavirus happens. What are the implications when you are going to make rush decisions to go to a partner like China because you're in a desperate conditions, right? What's going to happen is you're going to be exploited even worse, right? Because your bargaining power,
power is going to be very little. You're the country that needs boosting the most, ladies and gentlemen. That's why when it's not planned, it's bad, ladies and gentlemen, because you do not have the capacity to pick and choose what are your trade partners, ladies and gentlemen. These are the things that opening government specifically are wanting to eliminate, right? Exploitations, but unable to happen under their side of the house because they never told you how are the process analysis, why suddenly exploitations cannot happen under their side of the house. That's why it's better. We say that it's better to not self-sustain. We think that that's a jargon, that a positive jargon, but it's never been explained why then in the current context it's good to begin with. We said that as long as you're not rushed into decisions because of bad timing, we're still stand in this case and we're the most relevant team in this case. So right now I'm going to divide my, I'm going to respond to opening government and closing government, right? First of all, opening government. So essentially what they told you, they want to invest in local goods and they don't want to exploit people's job, right? First of all, in terms of local good, we think that right now there's already incentive for, in a context that there are no corona, for example, people already in government are incentivized to do that because there are demand from the people who are pushing for SMEs and stuff like that, right? So we don't think that this is urgent and there's no explanations why it specifically needs to be at time of crisis, right? But second of all, they told you that in order for them, they told you that they're okay with not having people to not have jobs and riots. It's weird because they're supporting unsustainability, especially when people also lose job over COVID, not only economic activity, right? It's not ideal because people do not have savings, for example. It's very abrupt. It's harder for them to be exploited, even worse under opening government, right? When you do not have money, the implications are regardless you are able to produce good or like local goods, nobody is going to buy this, ladies and gentlemen. So the local and sustainability cannot happen under their side of the house because economic activities cannot happen when people are unable to consume their goods, ladies and gentlemen. This is why you should regret that because it's this on first declining independency is making people unable to utilize, to have money or to be involved in economic activity. And that's why we regret that as a closing government, right? But then closing government talks about on how that, well, it's good because we're going to re-examine our assets and it's part of the colonizations. The colonizations, I don't really get it because honestly, imperialism is not a thing because in economic trade, even if in the past that exists, but specifically in economic trade, you get benefit from that economic trade, right? Because you get the money or income from export and import. So we think that this till some extent still provide the benefit and you have a degree of control, ladies and gentlemen. So it's not like people are enforcing what to take away or natural resources freely like what happened in the past. So it's weird for them to really champion this over anything else. But talking about re-examining assets like they told you, right? We say that this is at the end of the day should not be prioritized because right now it's at the cost of the livelihood of a lot of people to begin with, right? Most likely what's going to be beneficial is people who are specifically going to distribute or produce coffee leaf. But for other regions like Bali, for example, they're going to be burdened because there's no one coming because they rely so much on tourism and they can come and can get benefit from that. We said that we should regret that. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, Position Whip. That is the end of this debate. Thank you for the debate. Because this is a silent round, all teams can immediately go back to the main hall to wait for announcement or whatever that is. And if later you want to ask for constructive, you can either approach me or my panels, Jasbel and Dio. Thank you, guys. Selamat menunggu. Oh, and immediately leave this room ya, termasuk observers.
Thank you, Kak. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, is Orcom not gonna stop the recording? Okay, whatever. Apakah Dio sama Jasbel udah ada initial call? Kalau belum, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Udah ada gambaran sih, tapi mungkin give me time saja. Ini masih recording loh.
Iya, makanya kayak belum dimatiin. Oke. 5 minutes ya?
Bilang dong supaya stop di record.
Iya, ini kayaknya dia tidak ada di dekat Zoom-nya.
Chat ini aja kita chat kali ya.
Yeah, sure.